My name is Suganya Bhaskaran, and I'm a product engineer with the Runtime Group in Esri. In this demo theater, I'll talk about how you can display features using pop-ups, edit them, and also talk about some of the capabilities provided by the pop-ups in the iOS SDK. Before we get started, are you all here iOS developers? You are? Okay, a few of them. How many of you are familiar with version 100 or higher of the runtime SDKs? Okay, a couple of them. Okay. All right, let's get started. So here's our agenda for today. I'll first very briefly talk about what pop-ups are in the context of ArcGIS platform, and then we'll take a closer look at how you can configure pop-ups in web maps. And then we'll see how you can display those web map pop-ups in your iOS app. We'll also see how you can create pop-ups in code and talk about the various capabilities and support the default pop-up provides in the iOS SDK. And for those of you who wish to take it further, I'll briefly talk about how you can customize pop-ups as well. So, first up, what is a pop-up? As you know, it's a UI component that is typically used to view and edit geographical elements like features or graphics on a map. The information can be attributes, attachments, charts, hyperlink, and so on. And pop-ups typically honor and adheres to the ArcGIS platform-wide rules. And pop-ups, where can pop-ups be configured? It can be configured in your ArcGIS Pro, in ArcGIS Online or your portals, or in runtime through code. So let's begin this next section, pop-ups in web map, with a quick tour of how you can exactly configure that, pop-ups in web maps. So I have a couple of web maps authored in my ArcGIS organization. First, we'll see how you can set up a basic pop-up configuration. So I have here a map showing cities in the state of Utah. Pop-up, as you might know, is enabled by default, and tapping on a feature would simply bring it up. So the appearance of the default pop-up is like this. It is a plain list of attributes, names, and their values. And all of this may not be relevant to our users. So let's try to customize this. I can do that by using the more options from the layer and choosing configure pop-up. And let me first change the title, and you can configure your pop-up with a combination of static text and attribute values, the city name here being the attribute value. So let me change it to include city name and state name. I should be able to look this up. There we go. And when it comes to pop-up contents, there are quite a few options, but for this case, let's keep it simple and leave it the default and say configure attributes here. Now, I don't want all of these attributes, so I'll just choose city name, state name, elevation of the city, and population, just a few of them. Say OK, save the map, and tap on a feature to bring up the pop-up. So there we have it, a subset of attributes that are relevant to our users. So next, let's switch to the other web map that I have, which has demographic information of counties in the state of Utah. So slightly more information than before. Let me again tap on a feature to bring up the default pop-up. You know, it has population, population density, ethnicity, and a whole lot of other information. So for this example, let's say our users are real estate based and they want to see only those relevant attributes, right? So let's try to customize this pop-up. And similarly, like before, I choose configure pop-up And for title, let me say I include name and the county name followed by the state name. Okay, now for pop-up contents, now I just don't want, I don't want just a subset of attributes, but rather I want to present them in a slightly different way. So I can choose a custom attribute display from here and say configure. So this gives me a nice editor where I can add text, static text, as well as attribute values. Now I have already typed up some information that I think would be relevant to our users. So let me just paste it over here. So if you look at, let's go through this quickly, and it's just some basic information about the county and some attributes written out and their values. So I can just make this bold and just highlight the properties, that the attributes that I am interested in a different color, maybe. Now, and for those users that wish to get more information about the county, I want to include a wiki link here. And I happen to know the format Wikipedia uses for their counties. So this format should work. Note the presence of attribute values here. So let me just cut this and embed that HTML here. Bold, say OK. Now in addition to the attribute information that I just configured, I would also like to add a chart. Let's say I want to add a pie chart, right? Give it a name like occupancy, and for fields, again I choose my relevant fields, say vacant properties, owner occupied, and rented properties. Say OK. Save the map, and I'll bring up the pop-up again. There we have it, our custom formatted attributes, and there's also the wiki link here which should work, and there's our pie chart as well. So now we've configured two pop-ups, utilities and demographics. Let's switch back to the slides and continue. Next, I'll talk about how these webmap pop-ups can be displayed in your iOS app. And the first step for that would be to load those existing maps with pop-ups configured in your app. And then you would bind that map to map view. We do this so the contents of the map, all the layers in it, would be rendered first. Then whenever user taps on the map, we want to be able to display pop-ups for features in that tap location. So we know identify operation on the SDK allows you to discover features at a particular tap location. So we would do that next. And the SDK allows you to get pop-ups directly from the identify results. And then we would add these pop-ups to a specialized view controller exposed by the SDK, which is called a Popups view controller. You can think of this like a master view controller that internally manages some more other view controllers, each having their own purpose and behavior, like attachment management, media management, and so on. So once you've added this, you can now choose to change how your pop-up appears, the animation, and so on. And you can also implement some of the delegate methods that get fired on various pop-up events. Once you've done all that, you'd finally want to present your pop-up view controller, and you as a developer are also responsible for dismissing it. So next, let's look at demo of how you can display these pop-ups in an iOS app. So I have Let me switch to Xcode here, not this project. So I have this project configured with the iOS SDK. Okay, so when the app loads, viewDidLoad is the first method that gets called, and in here I'm initializing my map with the Utah cities web map that we first configured. And when the map loads, I bind my map to the map view, so the contents of the map, the cities layer, will be now rendered. What I'm also doing is I've adopted the GeoView touch delegate protocol. GeoView is a superclass of MapView, and I'm setting the touch delegate of the map view to be my current class. Why do I do this? Because I want to be able to listen to the touch events of my user. So that's what I've done here. So this method gets called back asynchronously whenever user taps on the map, and I get the screen point from it, and I pass it as a parameter to the identify layers operation. The identify layers also takes in a tolerance, which is basically the accuracy or the precision of the touch, and whether or not we want features to be returned in addition to pop-ups, and maximum results per layer in case there are more than one layer. And identify is an async operation, and it is going to give us an array of identify layer results object. So I simply iterate through the results, get hold of the pop-ups from the results, put them in an array, and then I go ahead and create an instance of this pop-up view controller class that I was talking about, and give it a pop-up and a style, and I can now present the pop-ups view controller. One more thing, if I scroll up, you would have also noticed that I have adopted this pop-ups view controller delegate protocol, and I've set the delegate to be my current class. Why did I do that? As I said, you as a developer are responsible for dismissing the pop-up. So when the user taps the done button in the pop-up, this delegate method is going to fire back, and in it, I dismiss the pop-up. So let's run this app now. Okay, we have the layer rendered. Let me tap on a feature to bring up the pop-up. So the map views touch delegate method is called as I tapped, which we then pass in as an input parameter to the identify. The pop-ups are identified and they are given to the pop-ups view controller, and that's what we see here. You would notice that the attributes here are the exact same attributes, the subset of attributes that we configured back in our web map. And there's the attach tab, which would have attachment if any. And now I tap done, and the other delegate method gets called, in which I had dismissed my pop-up. Next, let's switch the web map and try to load the demographics map. Run it again. Give it a minute to build. Give it a minute to render as well. Okay, so now let me tap on a feature to bring up the pop-up. So all the custom formatting that we did in our ArcGIS org have come automatically to our pop-up in the iOS app. And I can even tap the link here, which opens the Safari View controller and loads the Wikipedia page here. And the pie chart that we configured is under the Media tab, and it is an interactive chart, so as I tap, I see some useful information at the bottom. So the pop-up view controller manages all of this, the displaying of attributes, the wiki page in a separate view controller, the media information in a separate view controller, all of this. So let's dismiss this. So that's basically how you can configure whatever way you are used to configuring pop-ups in your ArcGIS online or org, and you can easily bring those to your iOS app. Let me switch to the slides now. Okay, so that was configuring pop-ups in WebMap and using them, getting them to display in an app. Next, let's talk about how you can create pop-ups in code. You may want to do this if the web maps you're working with don't have pop-ups, or you don't work with web maps to start with, but you still want to be able to display pop-ups for your features. So you need to create them first. So here's the workflow to do that. The first, if you start at the top left, the first step would be to add your layer of interest to the map in code, and then you would bind the map to the map view. The layer would be drawn now. You can then identify the layer, and you would get back features from the identify results, create pop-up from features, add pop-ups to the pop-ups view controller, present and dismiss the view controller. This workflow is quite similar to the workflow that I talked about earlier, except in a couple of places. First is you don't get features, you don't get pop-ups directly from your identify operation. Instead, you just get the features. And the next one is you create pop-ups in code for these features. So the code to do that, to keep it simple, is just this. You just create a pop-up with an instance of a geo element. The geo element that I refer here can be a feature that comes from a feature service or a feature layer, or it can be an in-memory graphic. And a pop-up created in code by default would include all of the fields in that that's defined on that geo element, but you can of course customize it. Next, let's see what the default pop-ups in the iOS offers. So we know that pop-up allows you to view and edit attributes, but the iOS pop-up also allows you to edit attributes inline, and it provides you input forms in a number of different formats like segment control or lists or date picker, depending on what type of attribute you are editing. And the pop-up also provides you out-of-the-box data validation, including ArcGIS-wide support for range encoded domains, etc. And I talked about attributes and attachments and media, but pop-up also allows you to edit geometry, and by working with Sketch Editor. Sketch Editor is another component of our SDK, which allows your users to interactively sketch points, lines, and polygons on map. And pop-up allows you to manage attachments. You can choose the size, provide names, and we saw it can be used to display charts, graphs, and hyperlinks. And pop-up also honors or displays the editor tracking information. So it can show which user created and edited the feature and when. And pop-up honors some of the capabilities or settings at the service level. for instance, if your service is published in such a way that it allows only add and you cannot edit or delete it, the pop-up isn't going to show you edit or delete buttons. And similarly, if your service has ownership-based access control configured, the pop-up is going to honor that as well. And if you want your non-owners to not edit or delete features, it's going to respect that as well, depending on the user that's logged in. So with that, I'll show another demo for all of the other things that we've talked about, how you can create pop-ups, editing, and some of the rules that it enforces. And for that, let me bring up the other Xcode project that I have. So in this project, I'm first creating a service feature table with the URL to the feature layer that I have here. I then create a feature layer from the table. I initialize a map. I add the feature layer to the map. And like before, I bind the map to the map view, and I set the map's touch delegate to be my current class. What I'm also doing here is initializing a sketch editor, and I'm assigning that on the map view. And like before, I listen for this delegate method. Whenever user taps, I get the screen point. I perform identify on the feature layer, and you would notice this parameter, in which I'm saying return pop-ups only, is false, which means I want features also to be returned in this case. And I get an identify layer result back, and from the identify layer result, I get geo elements, in this case the features directly and not the pop-ups like before. And I end up creating my own pop-up, and the rest is the same. I add the pop-ups to an array, I create an instance of the pop-ups view controller and present it. I've implemented a few pop-ups delegate methods that each get fired back at different stages. Let me quickly walk through them as well. So the first one here, I talked about editing feature geometries using sketch editor, but you need to tell the pop-up's view controller which sketch editor to use. So that's what we give it here. And before doing that, I'm starting the sketch editor with the geometry of the feature for which we are currently displaying the pop-up. And then the next method here is fired when the user is about to edit geometry. And in this case, we need to dismiss the pop-up so we can show the map so the geometry can be edited. So I'm dismissing the pop-up. And the next two methods here get fired when the user cancels editing or when they finish editing. And I'm stopping the sketch editor in both of those places. And when they're done editing, this is where you would also send the edits to the server, etc. And finally, like before, when they hit the done button, this method gets fired and I'm dismissing the pop-up. So let me run this app now. So this is a really basic feature service that I have here with just a couple of features in it. And let's just tap on this purple feature to bring the pop-up. And let's edit it. First, let's go through these attributes. The first is the incident type. It is a coded domain that is set up in ArcGIS server. So as I type, pop-up brings up this nice list for me to pick up. So let me change the type. And the next one, damage extent, is similarly another coded domain. So let me change that as well. I'll choose destroyed. And you see that pop-up is now giving me an alert. This is because the damage extent was also set up as a feature type, which you might know has its own default values for other attributes and symbols, right? So it's asking me whether I want to keep my current values or default reset to default. Let me keep the current values. And the next one is the area zone here. As I remove, you see pop-up is giving me an alert. This is because it's a non-nullable field that is defined. So I give it a number. The alert is still there. That's because it's warning me in the bottom that this is a range domain field and it can only take values 1 to 3. So I give it a good number, and you might have noticed the done button was gone when it was invalid, and it's back on now. And pop-up also allows me to it enforces the string lengths, so, and doesn't allow me to go over the length that is set up. And pop-up recognizes the date fields and gives me a date picker, and these are just text fields. And the occupancy one, this is an interesting field, because even though this is a coded domain as well, because it has 3 short values, pop-up kind of optimizes it and gives me an inline list instead of presenting a new one modally. So that's that. Let's now edit geometry. And as you can see, this is the sketch editor in action here. Let's move the geometry close to Chicago and say done now. And I can also add attachments and change the attachment size. Done. You get all of these capabilities just by tapping into the one view controller and listening to some of its delegate methods really easily. Just to point out, you might have noticed that we changed the feature type from affected to destroyed, so it's also changed the symbology now. So that's how you use the Popups view controller to edit features. We just have a couple more minutes, so I will really go through really fast talking about customizing pop-ups so we can allow the next people to set up. So you can customize the existing pop-ups view controller by changing the header. In this case, there is a map view in the header and a label showing coordinates as the footer. You can change the control or you can define your theme so the pop-up looks something different. This is still the default pop-ups view controller. So you can either do that, or you can define your own custom pop-ups entirely. You can build your views from ground up. And I have some screenshots from a prototype of the upcoming collector app that is being built on the newer versions of runtime to see how the pop-up is displayed, and you can slide up and the different ways you can add attachments and the way things change. The tab bar, that you get the tabbed view only when you add attachments. So that's custom pop-ups. So to summarize everything, we saw pop-ups in web maps and how you can load that in your iOS apps. And we saw how you can create and display pop-ups in code, pop-up capabilities, how you can edit them, and customizing pop-ups. So that's it. Thank you. I'm sorry we're out of time, but I'm available for any questions you might have just right outside. Thank you.